Good afternoon or good evening. Welcome to the Friday evening update, October 2nd, here on the tropics. We are back in business again. The Atlantic, there was a little brief break in activity here, and now we are back. And we're discussing Tropical Depression 25 here in the Western Caribbean, advancing up to the northwest towards the Yucatan Peninsula. We have another area of interest here that we're going to be talking about second. And a couple of things to briefly note is this tropical wave here that is advancing off to the northwest, and the remnants of Paulette here that are still around a month later after its genesis here, which is incredibly impressive. But these will continue to decay as it moves off to the south and west. Well, starting with Tropical Depression 25 here, we can see that this is a very broad system this evening that looks very deceiving right now. If you look under the cloud layer, you can see that we have a very broad lower level circulation. There's kind of hints of that here that is removed from the actual, mid-level center here. So this is not going to be able to strengthen quickly, contrary to how it looks on satellite right now with all this banding heading into the system, and it would have to stack and be able to really, have these bands be surface-based much more than they currently are and connected to the surface circulation of the system. And since that is not happening at present, this will likely not be able to organize in the immediate short term. This may be able to organize before making landfall on the Yucatan Peninsula, but generally speaking, this is not going to be able to strengthen too much. So we still have tropical storm warnings up for most of the Yucatan Peninsula here, as this will likely be a tropical storm. The next name on the list is Gamma, and that will be definitely something to watch, but the primary threat with the system is rainfall anywhere from, the entire Yucatan Peninsula and parts of Central America all the way into Florida and the Greater Antilles. If we look at the broad view of the system, we can tell the overall environment that the system is currently embedded in. This will change over the next 24 to 48 hours, and we have this very deep moisture that is present near the system here, and there's a lot of mid-level moisture that the system can feed off of right now because it is in a very deep tropical environment here. But as you can see, immediately off to the northwest of the system, you have a trough that has dug into the Gulf of Mexico, very similar to the situation that Beta was in a couple weeks ago. And you have a lot of shear that has developed over the southwestern and generally southern third of the Gulf of Mexico here. And you can see that as this continues to advance, this shear will not be moving in tandem with the system. And so this will allow for a decoupling, if you will, of the mid-level moisture field that this is going to be in. If we look at the GFS model solution here, you can see this is, as of right now, you have a surface low that is generally under the mid-level low here. Not exactly stacked, but it is there, and you have a very deep mid-level moisture field that this is in. And as we move forward, you can see that it is able to intensify as it advances towards the Yucatan Peninsula. But watch what happens here as it continues towards the Yucatan Peninsula. This, once centralized area of moisture becomes very strung out, and you can see all this moisture that gets pushed over Florida. So this will be bringing rainfall well away from the system here, and this moisture field gets stretched out, and you have a lot of dry air that is able to get wrapped up into the surface circulation and essentially choke out all thunderstorm activity near the surface circulation here. And this mid-level circulation essentially just disappears, and is all the mid-level moisture that was associated with the system now moves over Florida, and the system essentially just becomes a surface low on this particular GFS run. And it really depends on what exactly where exactly this is going to be when it is, in this kind of period of turning generally off to the southwest. On the previous GFS model run, you had a system that is a little further to the north and east here, and this particular GFS model run is an outlier compared to the previous runs of the GFS. And why that is because of where exactly it is when it is kind of sitting over the Yucatan Peninsula. And thankfully, this will not have a lot of moisture with it, so this will not be able to provide extensive rainfall totals over the Yucatan Peninsula as if it were a system that is not struggling with dry air. And so, but it will still be dropping very heavy rain here. Don't get me wrong, but it depends on where exactly this is. And so you have, if we look at the GFS 850 millibar vorticity here, you can see that this is the initialization we have of, our system here. And as it advances off to the north, you can see you kind of have a strong storm here that develops, maybe a 60-mile-an-hour tropical storm that makes landfall on the Yucatan Peninsula here. And then as it continues to advance off to the north, it really depends on how far north this goes. And so on this particular GFS run, the center of the circulation is very close to the Yucatan Peninsula. And so that land interaction generally strings out the circulation. If it was a little further to the north, that wouldn't be happening. So on this particular model run, you get to see that the system's circulation kind of just gradually unravels and generally is pushed off to the southwest. And why that happens is because the southeasterly flow that pushes the storm towards the Yucatan Peninsula transitions to southwesterly flow, northeasterly flow that pushes the storm southwestward due to the presence of the trough and the surface high that develops behind the trough. Here you can see that here just off the coast of Texas, and this generally pushes the storm southwest, and it turns very slowly. So it really depends on where exactly this is sitting. If it's sitting, a little bit further to the northwest, like in the previous GFS run, you can see that a tighter core of vorticity is present. However, on this run, this is not the case, and so it takes a lot longer for the system to possibly re-strengthen, and so that is why this run is an outlier compared to the last couple of runs here that keep it rather present here, and you do have still a strong tropical system that is in the southwestern Gulf of Mexico that this system would obviously bear watching compared to what the GFS has this run, which is something getting buried into the Bay of Campeche and generally just dying. And we hope for this solution because we do not want to be tracking this for very long. As this other feature here that we're going to be talking about in a few minutes is moving into the scene here. We don't really want to be dealing with this at the same time. So we're hoping that the secondary solution that the 18Z GFS run has is the solution that actually happens here. But, the possibility of this possibly being around in the southwestern Gulf of Mexico and kind of just sticking around here for a little while and, kind of just meandering here, generally towards Mexico, is something that does, bear watching, and this could be around for, a week here. But anyway, if we look at the National Hurricane Center forecast, you see that general northwest motion, and then that gradual turn to the south and west. Where exactly this turn happens, it could happen right here. It could happen up here. That is very dependent on where exactly this storm stalls. If it's a little stronger, then it would likely be a little further to the north. If it's weaker, then it would be further to the south. And if it, is kind of in between those two, it would be somewhere in here. So if it does, in fact, stay over land, this will likely just completely decay and not be very powerful going forward, and will likely just kind of decay here in the southern Gulf of Mexico and the Bay of Campeche. But if it does, in fact, take this National Hurricane Center track, we may be watching this system for another week here, as this is, in the southwestern Gulf on 1 p.m. Wednesday. So Now back out to the Caribbean here. So we just talked about Tropical Depression 25. Watch that for a flooding threat here in the Florida Peninsula and the southwestern Atlantic here, as this will be bringing heavy rain for a while, especially in the Yucatan Peninsula. Please do be safe there. And now we're going to be discussing this feature here in the Eastern Caribbean. Right now, this is not too much of a concern due to how strewn out this is. Does not have a very centralized area of vorticity. This is just a very large complex of thunderstorms that is horizontally tilted right now, and it's generally a wave axis that has flow out of the southeast on the eastern side, and then flow that is generally back to the southwest here on the western side. And so this is not very organized or very tight or very steep or anything that is, imminent in terms of development. And so this is not going to be able to develop in the short term, and this will likely continue as it deals with shear from this trough that is currently sitting over it. And if we look at the 250 millibar wind here, we can see that in action as this trough here is draped over the southeastern Caribbean and southwestern Atlantic. And you have our system is right here, and so this thunderstorms will not be able to congeal in this type of environment. But as this storm generally moves off to the west, this trough will be decaying and will be thinning out, and so it will cut off a little bit here, and you have a kind of cutoff low that tries to develop here near or south and west of Hispaniola, and this moves in tandem with the system. But what generally happens is this environment, you can see this cutoff low backs away off to the southwest, this first cutoff low, and then there's a second cutoff low that develops behind it, that you can see this kind of area of flow that is this trough, this little area of vorticity in the upper levels that kind of moves generally off to the northeast of the system and moves in tandem with the system, but is not very strong. And so this enters an area of rather light flow aloft, and the dominant overall flow in this part of the Atlantic here is generally upper level ridging, and so this flow is very light and divergent here, which will allow for the system to potentially organize, and it enters a state of more background vorticity in this general region of the southwestern Caribbean, as that is normal for this time of year, and this state in the southwestern Caribbean is generally more favorable for development. So if we look at the 850 millibar vorticity, if I can get the right thing up, if we go back here, you can see around 2 days out, here this is 48 hours out, and you can see our wave here just off to the south of Hispaniola and heading towards Jamaica, and you can see how broad it is. But as it is able to generally advance off to the west-northwest, you can see that something is here in this vicinity. And again, we're talking about a 4-day forecast here, so this is not an immediate threat to land, but regardless of development in the short term, this entire area, the Greater Antilles and Puerto Rico, will be dealing with heavy rain as this continues off to the west-northwest into the Western Caribbean. And so we may need to watch this down the road for potential development here right now. And this would be entering a pretty favorable environment overall. The moisture is not as deep as Tropical Depression 25, but it's still there. And, things in October in the Western Caribbean is not something that I would take for granted here. So just kind of watch this, keep this in the back of your mind as we watch Tropical Depression 25 as it enters the southern Gulf of Mexico. And we'll continue to watch this over the next few days. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.